And welcome, Hoosier fans, to another episode of Doing the Work, the first show on the Back Home Network covering IU women's basketball. This is our 130th episode, recorded on Wednesday, October 16th, 2024. I'm your host, Jeff Marlow, joined tonight by my co-host, Kathy Amos. And tonight we will be previewing the Iowa Hawkeyes, concluding our preview of some of the Big Ten opponents for your Indiana Hoosiers. But tonight we'll start this episode the way we do every episode, and that's with our Hoosier Proud banner moment. And Kat, the only thing I could get with this, is the fact that the AP ranking came out this week, and Indiana continued its string of staying in the AP top 25 poll. Barely. They hung on. They were the number 25 team in the preseason poll this week, extending their streak that goes back to the time Mackenzie Holmes stepped on campus as a freshman, basically. So our banner moment is brought to you by Home Field Apparel, presenting sponsor of the Back Home Network, who includes the Assembly Call, Crimson Cast, X's and Joe's, and now the Dribble Drive. Home Field is constantly releasing new schools or updating their products for schools in their existing line. You're bound to find something for you or anyone in your life that just loves great collegiate gear. Not only do you get quality apparel, but you are supporting an Indiana-based business that has its roots in the Kelly School of Business. Go to homefieldapparel.com and use our promo code HOME23, that's HOME23, to get 15% off your entire first order. That's promo code HOME23 for 15% off. Once again, the website is homefieldapparel.com. Wear one for the team. So in news, not a lot of news this week, except, we did see a little bit of some of the schedule get finalized out last week with the TV times. But the Big Ten well represented in the preseason AP top 25. South Carolina was actually the number one team, followed by UConn, and then USC was the first Big Ten team at number 3, UCLA at number 5, Ohio State at number 14, Maryland at number 18. So the AP poll kind of, giving them a lot more love than Kathy and I did a little bit maybe last week. And Nebraska came in at number 23. And of course, we said IU was number 25. Iowa, Illinois, Michigan State all received votes in the top 25. In fact, Iowa would have been the number 26 team. And as far as non-conference opponents, Stanford was the only non-conference opponent, at least that we know of for sure, that received votes in the AP top 25 poll. So, Kathy, I'm going to throw it over to you for the Amos angle and maybe get your thoughts about the news or the poll ranking, whatever on your mind.
Yeah, I think you hit the banner moment on the head, being ranked 25th, lower than maybe we have come to expect in recent years. But I think it's very fair, based on, we lost our top 2 scorers from last year, which we talked about on our breakdown, and everyone I think listening to this podcast is well aware of. And so not knowing how the newcomers or the returnees are going to step up and fill those holes makes it very much legitimate to me that we're ranked 25th. But the fact that we're ranked 25th, that makes it the 6th season in a row. So 6th season in a row that we have opened up the season in the top 25. Once they got in, as you mentioned, in that top 25 5 years ago, we never have stepped out since. So what a great run, Coach Morin has really built this program back to, and all of our players buying into her system and her culture and everything that goes along with it. And then on the bigger picture note, the Big Ten, absolutely well represented. You had 6 teams in that top 25 plus 3 more in the receiving votes column. And so you got 9 teams in the Big Ten, which is half the teams. But it goes to everything we've been saying since, we've been really talking about the previews of all these other teams about how deep the Big Ten and strong it's going to be. And so I think those rankings there absolutely reflect that. So really excited about it. We're knocking on the door here of about 2.5 weeks or so until we have opening day on November 4th. So not long now. So I think between now and then, we only have 2 more shows. So really looking forward to getting some balls bouncing on the court himself and seeing some hoops. So that is what I got for you today.
And so let's just talk about our next team here, and that's a long time, maybe not long time, but in most recent times, what has become a really bitter rival that is really taken this pairing, this combination of teams really to the next level, because they've been battling for the top of the league for the last 3-4 years from that standpoint. And it's funny, and funny not Kathy, but funny as in just weird a little bit to talk about the Iowa Hawkeyes and not talk about Lisa Bluder being on the sideline. Lisa Bluder stepped down in May of after the season to take her retirement. I mean, I know some people are going to sit around and be like, well, of course, Caitlin Clark and Gabby Marshall, who are all going to talk about, they're left. So, that'd be a great time to get out. But I think there was still some of us who were surprised that Lisa Bluder stepped down with some of the recruits they had coming in that we'll talk about as well. But so that takes us to Jan Jensen. Jensen is going to start her first year as the head coach of the Iowa Hawkeyes. She played at Drake for Lisa Bluder when Lisa Bluder had been the head coach at Drake. She was actually the Missouri Valley Conference MVP and leading scorer as a player for Drake. Then she spent 30 plus seasons. She spent a year or two in Europe. I was looking up her bio a little bit, spent a year or two in Europe playing, but has spent basically the last 30 plus years being an assistant to Lisa Bluder, first at Drake and then following her to Iowa, where she was basically the number one assistant at Iowa pretty much that whole time. And what was interesting looking at her bio, she actually, Drake tried to get her to stay. They offered her the head coaching job when Lisa Bluder left, and Jensen declined it. I won't say turned it down, declined it, and went with Bluder to Iowa. So it's always interesting in this situation where you got a longtime assistant who you think are going to do a lot of the same things, but there are going to be certain dynamics that are just different, and how she manages the game. I don't think style and stuff will put different. I think you'll see a lot of the similarities there, but just, calling a timeout here, a rotation there. I mean, there are going to be some different dynamics to it that I think will take some getting used to for not only her, but the team. Because there's going to be some times when they're going to be like, hey, Coach Bluder might have done it this. They won't say that outwardly, but I think there'll, be some of that, and maybe even more so among the fan base. So, but Jan Jensen will be starting her first year as head coach at the Iowa Hawkeyes. So I'm going to throw it over to Kathy, let her talk a little bit about the history here.
Yeah. First, before we jump in there, I think what will be interesting, and we'll probably touch on this once we get into their stats more. One philosophy change I wonder if we'll see is a different style of defensive play from Jan Jensen. That will be an interesting thing and storyline for me to watch. And again, we'll get into that as to why I'm saying that, but very interesting too, that Jan Jensen is so long under Lisa Bluder, but you're right, Jeff, it was a little bit of a surprise, even though, she lost, Coach Bluder lost quite a few of her core players from last year. She did have some great recruits coming in. She didn't announce it right away either. That was the other thing. I think they had already picked up their transfer in the transfer portal, who we'll talk about in a minute here, Lucy Olson, and essentially then it kind of reopened the transfer portal for those Iowa players to decide if they wanted to stay. Now, the fact that they kept Jan Jensen around, I'm sure was why they didn't have anyone transfer out. I'm sure Jan Jensen, if she wasn't the lead recruiter, was heavily involved in recruiting a lot of those players anyway. So, but anyway, let me go ahead and jump in, like you said, around the history of what we know about Iowa Hawkeyes. So last year they finished the season 34-5, 15-3 in the Big Ten, which was second overall to Ohio State. They did win the Big Ten championship and Big Ten tournament champions. And I think everyone knows they were runner-up last year to South Carolina, losing in that national championship game. But some of the notable wins they had early on, they played Virginia Tech, who they beat 80-76 on a neutral site. They won against Kansas State 77-70 on a neutral site. They beat Ohio State at home 93-83. On the flip side, notable losses. Ironically, they played Kansas State twice, and that was the year Kansas State came in and beat them at home prior to them beating Kansas State at that neutral site. So they lost to Kansas State at home 65-58. They also lost to Ohio State away, 192. And then I think a lot of us might remember the Nebraska game when Nebraska just really clamped down on Caitlin Clark in the fourth quarter, and Nebraska beat them in Lincoln 82-79. The important thing that people might have been, why you note that fourth quarter would have been when Caitlin Clark would have broke the scoring record. And the fact that they held her scoreless sent her back to Iowa City without that record. In terms of Indiana and Iowa last year, again, two pretty prominent games, kind of lopsided in both ways. So when we went to Iowa City, Iowa definitely owned that one, 84-57. But when they came to Bloomington, we just owned them from the tip, 86-69. In terms of overall history between Iowa and Indiana, Iowa handily leads that 54-23, and they've won 6 of the last 10. So we, definitely has developed into a rivalry here over the last, I'd say, 4 or 5 years. And 6 of 10 is reflective of that. It was probably worse than that before, as you can see with the 54-23. So that's some of the history of Iowa and between Iowa and Indiana.
Yeah, and one of the things, go back to Jan Jensen's comment, you're commenting about Jan Jensen a little bit in the recruiting and opening up the portal. I think that a lot of them probably, it makes me wonder if they had Lisa Bluter had let some of those recruits, especially coming out of the portal, know that she was stepping down and that Jensen was going to be the person. I would not, my gut tells me is Lisa Bluter knew either they had already had a transition in place that was kept very quiet, or her thing was, I'm retiring if Jan gets the job, and it's from that standpoint. So
sorry to interrupt, Jeff. That is interesting. I was actually I'll credit to Austin Render. I was listening to the podcast that he did with Iowa. I think it was the play-by-play announcer, and that Iowa play-by-play announcer actually did say that before Lisa Bluter would leave, she wanted to make sure all of her staff still had a place somewhere if they wanted it. So I think you are onto something absolutely there.
So let's look at their stats from last year. And this is again from her hoop stats, but offensively, they averaged 91 a game, which was first out of the whole entire NCAA. They gave up 71.9, which was 319th. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. Scoring margin was 19.7, which was 7th. But their tempo, they averaged just under 77 possessions a game, which was 14th. And I think, again, part of their defense is they were willing to outscore you, but part of their defense, and when you look at their raw scoring, is that there were a lot of possessions, and so their attitude was, we're going to score 90 and you're not. And the teams that could run with them a little bit, the Ohio States, the Nebraskas, the South Carolinas were able to put up some points on them and also hold them in check a little bit. Their offensive rating was first. But their defensive rating was 20th. So again, they were giving up almost 72 points a game, but they were 20th in defensive ranking. They shot just under 50% from the field, which was second in the country. Can't remember who was first. Oh yeah, I do. It was us, Indiana. They shot just under 38% from three, which was 9th in the country, and they shot 78% at the line. On the opposite side, their opponents shot 40% from the field, and they allowed their opponents to shoot just under 31% from 3-point field goal on the threes, and that was 165th in the country. So they were about middle of the pack on that. But again, they were willing to give up something in order to play the tempo. And for a team that liked to push tempo, they only turned it over 13.8 times a game. That's really, really good for the amount of pace that they played with. They only forced 14.4, so their turnover margin was only plus 0.6. So again, defensively, I'm a little surprised by that, just because they seem to be so aggressive in trying to get opportunities to run, but they weren't creating them off the defensive end, at least on steals or things like that. They averaged 41.3 rebounds a game, which was 19th. They only allowed their opponents 35, so they were +6, just over +6 in rebounding margin. But they handed out just under 21 assists a game, which was first in the country, and their opponents only averaged 14.6. So they shared the ball, they moved the ball, and that was all showing up in their scoring, and obviously some of the players we're going to talk about. So, but I'm going to throw it over to Kathy and let her talk about some of these returning players.
Yeah, absolutely. So before jumping in there, I guess just to point out, and I had a question for you too on Jeff when I was putting the numbers together. So Defensively, 71.9 points per game, which is 319th in the country, but yet their defensive rating was 20th. And can you talk a little bit about the difference between and what makes up maybe that defensive rating, since that was so much higher than the points that they allow per game? I didn't know if you know what goes into that number. I certainly didn't. I didn't expect it to be that different.
I would say the defensive rating is heavily influenced by tempo and the fact that they were playing such an up and down game as compared to a team that maybe was only getting 65 to 70 possessions a game, where if you were giving up 71 a game and only playing a 65 to 70 possession game, then your defensive rating is going to be worse. So I would imagine that defensive rating that her Hoop Stats is calculating is heavily based on tempo.
Okay, good. Thank you. So that was one thing that jumped out to me with that. And then, just the fact that with the assists, not very surprising that they were first in the country in assists. A lot of that was a credit to Caitlin Clark, who we will obviously be talking about a little bit, like she's never been talked about before. It'll be a new thing for a podcast to talk about Caitlin Clark. So, but first, let's talk about some of the returning players. So, the headlining, I think, the returning players is Hannah Stuelke. Hannah was a starter, I believe, in every single one of her games. She's a 6'2" forward. She's a junior. She mainly played down low for them last year. She averaged around 24 and a half minutes per game, 14 points per game, and 6.6 rebounds. Also returning, I think, are two other key players for them. Sydney Afalter. She's a 5'11" guard. She's a senior. Sydney is an interesting one because, she really got a chance to shine, unfortunately, after Molly Davis went down with her injury towards the end of the season and ended up starting, I think, something around 13 games or something. I'm going off the top of my head. But that really helped her, I think, show what she could do. She ended up averaging on the season 25 minutes per game, 8.4 points per game, and 6.4 rebounds per game. If I'm going to guess, she's going to be somebody I think we see a lot more out of this year. She was kind of lined up behind quite a few players on Iowa's starting lineup last year. And once she got into that lineup, I think she showed what she could really do. Then Kylie Feuerbach is also a returning 6-foot guard for them. She's a redshirt senior as well. So 14 minutes is what she averaged, 2.6 points per game and 1.3. And then other players in terms of returning players that we should probably keep an eye on. I think the other one would be Taylor McCabe. We don't really talk a whole lot about her, but I could see her as a 5'9" junior guard out of coming to them from Nebraska, just starting her third year. I can see she might make a jump similar to how Hannah Stuelke did for them last year too. So I'll be kind of keeping an eye out for her as well. So those are some of the returning players I thought maybe to highlight.
Yeah, and Feuerbach's an interesting one because she spent a couple of years at Iowa State and had played a little bit at Iowa State, but she's battled an injury the last couple of years that I'm not sure she's ever really gotten healthy from. So Feuerbach to me is one, if she is finally healthy, she could play some minutes for them as well. And obviously Stuelke is the player that everybody knows coming back. She was, an all freshman Big Ten player. She's been a player, she's been I don't remember if she was all league, but she probably at least got some votes for the all league team last year. So this is, it's one of those where, she's obviously going to be kind of the headliner of what's coming back, but really, I think the player that's really going to kind of make them go. And I'm not saying you feel that you fill Caitlin Clark's shoes, because I think that has to be done a little bit more by committee, but they got one of the best transfers out of the portal in Lucy Olson, 5'9" point guard from Villanova, who I believe will have 1 year left in Iowa City. Mm-hmm. But she was a first team all Big East. She was third in the country in scoring at 23.3 a game. She shot 43.8% on field goals. Now her 3-point percentage, in my opinion, isn't much to write home about. She shot 29.4% on threes, but again, a point guard, and they obviously Caitlin Clark was their point guard. Right. So you would imagine Lucy Olson is going to step right into at least that spot, that point guard spot, and be expected to contribute heavily. Maybe not the 35 or so points a game that Caitlin Clark was capable of putting it up, but just the fact that she's capable of scoring 20 plus a game is going to give them a pretty good solid there. So just kind of get your thoughts about Lucy Olson.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think Lucy Olson was absolutely one of the best pickups in terms of what we've seen for Big Ten teams in the transfer portal. It obviously fit a huge gaping hole that they had in terms of a point guard needing to fill that position in particular. And not only did they get a point guard, but they probably got one of the best ones, if not the best point guard that was probably available in the transfer portal anyway. So, like you mentioned, she was third in the country in scoring. She was third behind Caitlin Clark and Juju Watson, right? So, she definitely put up some points too. So, yeah, I agree with you, Jeff. I don't see her jumping in and filling everything that Caitlin Clark left. That's just not going to happen. Caitlin Clark was a generational player, right? And I don't think we'll ever see. Well, I would bet we don't see numbers like that quite consistently or the hype around her. But I do think this is definitely going to fill a hole for them. So, we've now talked about 3 returning players that are key. Definitely between Hannah Stuelke and Sydney Afalter. Hannah started off all the games. Sydney definitely filled into one of those starters. You sure that Lucy does? Then you kind of guessed maybe Kylie Feuerbach. So as we talk about the incoming freshmen, the question I think still remains, like, who's going to be that 5th main person for them, whether they're starting or coming off the bench and playing starter minutes. It's hard to say. We mentioned Taylor McCabe, but let's talk a little bit about some of the freshmen. And I'll be candid, I don't know, follow recruiting a whole lot, know a whole lot about the freshmen, but they do have a large freshman class coming in of five players. So maybe I'll just highlight 2. Or to highlight 3 of them here real quick, Jeff, and we'll talk about those 3 that I think will probably be potentially at least players that might be able to see some playing time. So first we have Callie Levin is a 5'9" guard. She's a native of Iowa. She was 2024 Miss Iowa. She was also USA Today's Iowa Player of the Year. While she was here, her senior year, she averaged 22 points a game, 6.9 rebounds per game, 4.5 assists, 4.8 steals, and she was the McDonald's All-American. Next is Ava Hayden. She's a 6'4" center. So clearly adding some size here. She was the number 36 overall ESPN recruit ranking, and she's from Oregon. She was a 4-star prospect or a 5-star prospect, depending on who you look at. She's a 5-star post prospect, according to ESPN. Her senior year, she averaged 17.2 points and 11 rebounds per game. And then I want to mention the next person in particular, because this name will probably sound very familiar to everyone, which is Aaliyah Boston. Excuse me. Oh my goodness. Aaliyah Guyton. She is 5'7" guard. And the reason she sounds familiar, she is the daughter of AJ Guyton and she's from Peoria. She was the number 57 ESPN ranking and number 1 overall from Illinois. Also a 4-star prospect, averaging 21.6 points per game, 4.6 rebounds, and 3.8 steals. So those 3 in particular, I think, seem to be the top prospects. The one that sticks out to me, Jeff, and then I'll kick it back to you for your thoughts. The one that is intriguing is Ava Hayden, the 6'4" senior from Oregon. If she is able to translate her game as a center into the college play, I wonder if that would allow them to slot her into that 5th starting position and move Hannah Stuelke back over to a 4 position where it seems a little more natural for Hannah to play. So that was kind of my initial thoughts, and be curious to see what you kind of think of those 3 freshmen and if any of them might slot into that number 5 spot.
Well, somebody has to, in my opinion, because I'm not sure if Feuerbach starts. I really don't, even if she's healthy. And I don't think McCabe does either. I think you can see 2 freshmen starting. I really do. Because I think Levin was recruited with that attitude that she was going to get a spot. Hayden's interesting, though, because with her size and Iowa's history of having good post players and developing good post players, Gustafson, Sonano. I mean, there's a history there. And not only would that, it probably would allow them to move Stuelke to the 4, which is probably more of her natural position. So you could go 5 with Hayden, 4 with Stuelke. Let's say you put Olsen at the 2 even, or I'm not sure where they fit in. We know Olsen's been a point guard at Nova, but Levin and Olsen at the 2 guards, and then you put Affolter at the third guard. So they go 3 guards and allow Stolke to play more of the 4, which I really think that's probably her natural position anyway.
I do too. Yeah, that's why I mentioned
Whether
that.
being an undersized 5, I'm not sure Guyton, against, and once we get to the Big Ten, again, I would love to see it just because she's, one of my favorite. Her dad was one of my all-time favorite players at Indiana. In fact, Indiana was in the recruiting slightly, but I don't think ever really got serious enough for them, for the Guyton family, or for even IU. I would say maybe mutually. But you look at their, they're all their recruits are in the top 100 of the ESPN ranking. So they got some talent, but again, it's another thing to find them minutes in meaningful, in meaningful games.
Yeah, they do have 2 other freshmen, like we mentioned, just to touch on them. Both of them are from Wisconsin. Tegan I'm probably going to butcher this, Maligny, 6'1" guard from Wisconsin, and then Taylor Strimlow, a 5'1" guard. That one was interesting to me because you don't see a whole lot of short guards like that anymore. 5'1", I mean, that's even shorter than me. So either that's a typo or
somewhere. Yeah, I doubt you got it wrong, but wherever you found
it's 5'10". Okay, it is wrong. 5'10". That sounds better.
Yeah, I
had the roster pulled up here. Yeah, 5'10". So anyway, either one of them, from Wisconsin, both of them, like I mentioned, I'm not quite sure with all the other players that look, at least on paper, ahead of them, and with some of the returning players that Iowa has, I would be surprised that we see a whole lot of them this year. But again, not knowing a whole lot about them, I could be absolutely wrong on that. But I think the headliners, like I mentioned, are Kaylee Levin and Ava Hayden, maybe Aaliyah Guyton just getting in there as well. Maybe hopefully in their non-conference games, at least the ones where they're maybe get a little more of a cushion.
Yeah, and I'll go, obviously, with they lost quite a bit. They lost Caitlin Clark. Yeah. I'm not going to go through Caitlin's stats. I think we all know what kind of numbers she was putting up last year. They lose Gabby Marshall, who played 30 minutes a game, 6 points a game, just over a rebound, 1.6 assists. They lose Kate Martin, 29 minutes a game, 13 points a game, 7 rebounds. Molly Davis, who unfortunately got injured right at the end of the year, is averaging about 24 minutes, 6 points a game, 3 assists a game. I will say this, Kathy, and I know we all, Caitlin Clark was, as you said, a generational talent. Mm-hmm. In my opinion, I'm not, because I don't think you can replace Caitlin Clark by herself anyway. You have to do it with multiple people. And Lucy Olson can go a long way. Even some of the freshmen may eventually make you be like, oh, they're similar. But you don't just replace Caitlin Clark. It's like, to me, like going back to the days at UConn, you didn't just replace Diana Taurasi. You got somebody who was a little different and you kept going, but you don't replace. To me, I think Kate Martin becomes the player that they may find that was most indispensable, that when they look back on who they lost, because again, Caitlin Clark can't be replaced, in terms of just one type of player. But Kate Martin brought a lot to the floor, and I just kind of get your thoughts about who they lost is all. But what do you think about that? I think Kate Martin is maybe
I agree.
Most maybe the piece they missed the most.
I think so too. I mean, everyone knows, like you mentioned, about Caitlin Clark and her production, not just in terms of points, but in terms of rebounding and assists too. I mean, that's a huge goal whole by itself. But then you throw in the other 3 ladies, between Gabby Marshall, who didn't put up in terms of numbers a whole lot, but boy, she was a pest on defense. So, she's an interesting role player who's going to step up and really help them potentially on defense. But Molly Davis, same way, she could, when she needed to, she'd hit some big buckets for him, but didn't put up a whole lot of numbers. I agree. Kate Martin is going to be a huge hole for them to fill, but collectively, that's what made, I think, Iowa so good, especially towards the end of the year, and why they were able to back-to-back years make it to that championship game wasn't solely because of Caitlin Clark. I think it was because of the combination of all of these players that they had been playing together for quite a while as well. And now you have 4 of your 5 starters leaving the program.
Right.
I just think collectively that hole is just going to be huge to fill. So to be honest, I was actually a little surprised that Iowa was still getting votes in the top 25, because you just really, whether they're transfers or whether you're counting on freshmen or you're counting on players that haven't had proven production in the past, that's a lot to be putting onto a team to be stepping up and filling again. Now, and with the first year coach. Now I get it. Jan Jensen has been around, coached Bluter for 30 years and has seen what she does and has learned a ton from her. But that doesn't mean that she's going to be able to execute it just as well herself. And so I have a lot of big questions on Iowa for me personally, and it will be interesting to see. And we'll talk a little bit here about their non-conference slate, which is candidly probably one of the harder ones that we've seen in the Big Ten teams we've highlighted. I think they're going to absolutely lose some games early on. Now, I can see that they gel towards the end of the year again. Now, do I think that they're going to make another run to the national championship? No, I absolutely don't think so. But I think they can make some noise in the Big Ten every once in a while. And I think they could be a dangerous team come Big Ten tournament time. So that's kind of, on paper, what I'm kind of thinking right now, Jeff. But what kind of thoughts do you have on that? Where do you think, what am I wrong with here?
No, I agree. I think they have the ability, they have the potential to get better as the season goes along. But I just think early on they will have a little bit of a learning curve. And let's talk about a little bit about their non-conference schedule. They play Virginia Tech in Charlotte, who is coming off losing their two best players and their head coach. They'll play Drake. I'm not sure where that Drake game is, but that's usually a very good game.
I think that's usually played in Des Moines here. I could be wrong. That often they play both a men's Iowa and a women's Iowa team here in Des Moines at not at Drake, even though I know Drake's in Des Moines, but they usually played at Wells Fargo Arena. So I could be wrong on that. We'll need to fact check me, but that's usually where I think they end up playing.
And then they play Kansas and Sioux Falls. They'll play Tennessee and New York. I'm assuming that's in the city. And then Iowa State this year in Iowa City. So that'll be a home game in that rivalry game there. They get a double play against Nebraska, who has given them fits over the last couple of years. I mean, has played them very well. Now, here's the one thing. They may be the team that benefits a little bit from schedule because they're going to play Maryland, Indiana, USC, and UCLA at home. They go to Illinois and Ohio State, but if they somehow end up in the mix at the end, their home schedule being at home compared to the teams they have to play on the road may actually help them as seeding comes along for the Big Ten tournament, where they might, we might have been projecting them at 5th, 6th, 7th at the beginning of the season, but all of a sudden now maybe they're 3rd or 4th because they got some of the better teams at home. And we've already seen, I saw it on social media, I think it was on Twitter last week on X, that they've sold out all the games, the regular season games for this year as well. So, their crowd's obviously going to be a factor. So what do you think about their schedule?
Yeah, I have a lot of the same similar thoughts you have, Jeff. And I did just pull up their schedule. The Drake game is listed at Des Moines, in Des Moines, Iowa. Again, I'm assuming that is going to be here at the Wells Fargo Arena in downtown Des Moines, not at Drake's actual gym. But I could be wrong, but it's definitely in Des Moines. But yes, I thought the same thing when we were putting the run sheet together and doing our kind of research on them. To get Maryland, Indiana, USC, and UCLA, 4 of the teams that we mentioned being ranked at home, I feel like that's probably a lucky draw for Iowa this year. Now, and they're going to come into the Big Ten schedule really tested with Virginia Tech. Drake always seems to be a good show for them. Kansas, you don't know. That Tennessee game is intriguing as well. And then Iowa State is ranked in the top 10 right now. They have a lot of really great players coming back, and Iowa State is supposed to be really strong. So even though that's in Iowa City, I expect most of those games to really test them. So I think Iowa has set themselves up for potentially a non-conference record that at least on paper will give people some head scratching, because maybe they're so used to Iowa winning the majority of their games that it might be a little bit of a surprise to see them drop a number of those. But I think that's going to set them up to gel well for the Big Ten when they get there. And then having those 4 teams at home just really is probably really lucky, as you mentioned, they sell out. So overall, I think that the schedule, at least from a conference perspective, breaks in Iowa's favor for sure.
Yep. All right.
Okay.
So Coming up next, our next show is next Wednesday, October 23rd, when we will dive into the IU schedule and break it down a little bit, non-conference, and take a look at the conference season as well. If you want to see us do the show live and be a part of the live chat, make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/@Backhome Network. That's at the @ symbol, Backhome Network. So youtube.com/@Backhome Network. You can be a part of our private community as well. Find out more at assemblycall.substack.com. Special thanks to John Ringer of rigdesign .com for designing our logos. Also, a big thank you to Bob Thompson for our music that you heard through the broadcast. Thank you for listening. We'll be back to talk. Well, real quick, before I close this out, I want to get Kathy's thoughts, but I will remind you that Assembly Call will.
Oh, we lost you. You're muted. You're muted. Your microphone. There you go.
I got it. I don't know what it did, but anyway, we want to remind you, Assembly Call will be back tomorrow night. They've been kind of taking about one show a month here for the last few months, and so we want to tell you about that. But Kathy, want to get your thoughts? IU homecoming this week. Nebraska sold out. What do you think?
Cautiously optimistic. I think that's the phrase I've been decided to try to get into my head. I don't want to get any too far over my skis. I think a lot of us are not just Indiana basketball fans, we're Indiana football and Indiana all sports in general. And there's a lot of history there with Indiana football that's not been real positive. And I think a lot of us have probably a lot of PTSD, but boy, I'm definitely jumping on that Cignetti train for sure. And following him along. I'm really excited. Right now, actually, I'm wearing to work today, my Indiana football shirt that I got from Home Field Apparel earlier this year. I'm planning my Saturday morning and afternoon all around watching that game because the game will kick off here at 11 a.m. for me.
Yep.
So I'm trying to plan my morning and afternoon so that I can watch it and try to sync up Don Fisher and listen to him instead of the radio commentators, but really excited, just super excited. Been listening to a ton of football podcasts as well. And watching the interview that Coach Cignetti had on the Pat McAfee show. That was a lot of fun. So just really filling myself up with a lot of football these days on the positive side is really, really fun and refreshing. So I'm looking forward to it, Jeff. And I think that it's going to be a tight game, but I think we pull out a win on Saturday.
Yeah, I hope so too. Cause I'm going, we're going to go and enjoy the weekend and have a nice day at the game. It's supposed to be really good weather. Like I said, it's going to be packed. I will say this. I went to the last home game against Maryland, and that was as much fun as I've had at a football game in about 30 years. Just to see it and just to see the way they play and you just feel like there's a plan. They may not do everything exactly right, but there's a plan there, and they know what their plan is, and they're not going to deviate from it too much. So I'm cautiously optimistic, as you said. I think a win we're going to get, but I think this will be a little tighter game than we've been seeing. But I also could handle a 2-touchdown win too, or 3 touchdowns.
That's right.
But interesting, that it was put on social media today that all three teams, football, men's basketball, and women's basketball, all ranked in the top 25 for the first time at the same time in the school history. So from that standpoint, so
what is it? One of 5 or 6 universities, I think, in the country that have all 3 major programs. And then, if you look even beyond that, you have, I think our men's soccer is ranked now. Both our men and women's swimming and diving team are highly ranked as well. So, you got basketball, football, you got your soccer teams, your swimming and diving. So right now there's a lot going on that's on the positive side for a lot of Indiana sports. So, the volleyball team, I think, is out there doing some stuff, and baseball's was kind of getting started a little bit. So anyway, with some of their fall, I think they were doing some fall games and whatnot. So it's just a lot going on. It's a lot of fun. So, I'm not one to sit there and try to guess if Coach Cignetti is going to get hired by another university. It doesn't sound like his wife in particular is any excited to move from Bloomington or anything like that. I just want to enjoy the season, right? Because you never know with Indiana football when the wheels are going to fall off the train again. So I'm just enjoying this game by game. So, and if they don't win and they come out and they show a great game, I'm still pretty proud of our Hoosier football team.
I agree. So, and so finally, we want to thank all of you for listening. We'll be back to talk IU hoops again with you in 1 week. Until then, keep your elbows in, your eyes on the rim, and let's go Hoosiers.
All right.
All right.
Well, thanks everyone who is out there listening tonight and listening later on whatever podcast feed or YouTube or whatever you enjoy. Hopefully you're all getting excited for the football game coming up and getting geared up here for November 4th when we have our first real game against Brown. So Hoosier Hysteria this Friday too. We didn't mention that.
Yes.
They do have Hoosier Hysteria this Friday. I assume most of our listeners already know anyway, so I don't think it mattered. We didn't tell them.
Probably not. So, all right, I'm going to get out of here because I got to get some things done for work tomorrow. All right, bye everybody.
Good night.